Welcome. Welcome to another of our Wednesday yachting luncheons. It's beautiful to be here in San Francisco with our beautiful bay out the windows. And I know somebody who's really happy to be back in San Francisco, and that would be our Commodore, fresh from the Croatian Commodore's cruise, Commodore Teresa Brandner. Teresa.
Thank you, Ron. And yes, it's great to be back. I have to say, Croatia is fantastic, it's beautiful, and I want to give a plug for our we sailed on a boat called the Sesarica, and fantastic skipper crew. So if you ever go to Croatia, check that boat out. So it's actually a great, phenomenal time. And I missed you guys. I've missed 2 of these, so I'm back. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere, and again, ever. And but welcome everyone in the room, members and guests, and everyone who's watching online. Really enjoy this event, and I'm so glad that we can share it with you. For those who can't make it here to the clubhouse, really appreciate you tuning in and having your interest. We've got a great, very interesting speaker today with Adam, and submarines have always fascinated me, so we're going to learn more about that today. Anyway, great to be back, and I'm looking forward to today's presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Our historic Commodore, the first female Commodore in the history of St. Francis Yacht Club. A little bit about future speakers. In December, we will have the San Francisco Boys Chorus. That is to say, the Emmy Award-winning San Francisco Boys Chorus here for the traditional father-son luncheon. You want to make a reservation. That always sells out. In November, the perhaps best spokesperson and ambassador for the world of sailing that we've ever had, Gary Jobson, will be here to talk to us all about his latest of 19 books and the world of yachting as he sees it. Also in November, Lee Bruno will be here to talk all about misfits and mayhem, the tales from San Francisco's historic waterfront. That'll be a fun talk. You've been cooking on your boat. You've been kind of wondering about it. You want to come by in October to hear Tony and Landon. They are the founders of 30 Knot Gourmet. They'll talk all about how you can actually have incredibly good food while you're racing to Hawaii or offshore in any case. Our next speaker I want to mention, I want to open by asking the question, what makes greatness? What makes greatness? In this particular case, you could ask what makes greatness, why people have called our yacht club the greatest yacht club in, you name it, America, the world, whatever. Why would anybody say that? I would postulate that our 6-meter challenges in the 70s and 80s, our first ever from the Bay, America's Cup Challenge in the 80s, the Golden Gate Challenge, and our consistent performance in other kinds of match racing around the world, as especially exemplified by our member, Russ Silvestri. Quietly, without any of us realizing it, Silvestri founded a Challenge Cup committee a couple of years ago and has gone on to challenge all across America, the Morgan Cup, and a series of challenges all around the country that has brought honor back to our yacht club. He'll be here to speak about that in October, to talk all about the St. Francis Challenge Committee and how it endeavors way out in the future to schedule races and to participate with our Burgee in all these incredible regattas around the world, and to bring an unprecedented amount of glory, really, in the game of yacht racing to our club. So Russ would know about this. Russ, as you know, is a 2-time Olympian. He'll not say this, but he was named Olympic Athlete of the Year in 2000, and he's won the Mallory Cup himself. So he knows a little bit about the game of sailboat racing, and he's brought all of that to bear in this committee. I'm not sure who else could have done as good a job founding this committee for us. So you want to come and listen to Russ. And, of course, we now get to talk a little bit about our speaker today. It's always interesting to think about where the sort of seeds of a person's career begin. It turns out that I knew our speaker's grandfather back in the 70s. I produced something called the San Francisco Art Deco exhibition for the Oceanic Society as a benefit. And I sailed on Spirit, and he was George Cascadon was an incredible man about the Bay and significant innovator, really innovative person. And so it turns out that his grandson started sailing at the age of 5, first time ever, on a boat called Spirit, the very same one that Peter Sutter would later own. And, you know, sailing was interesting, but he started scuba diving at age 16 while going to Sir Francis Drake High School in Marin. And a kind of local hero there was Graham Hawkes, who'd founded this, what you could call recreational submarine company in the Bay Area. And at one point, he kind of got up the nerve to go over and kind of visit the Pampanito down here. He'd gone and visited the Pampanito, so he saw a submarine and thought, that's kind of a cool thing. And so after Graham went to get his degree at mechanical engineering from UC Berkeley, he got up his nerve and he went to meet Graham Hawkes, and he kind of thought, this is a local hero. And after a while, he brought by his resume and said, I kind of be willing to be an intern here for free and see what I can do. And Graham Hawkes liked the free part. And also that was pretty smart. The kid might have something going for him. And so our speaker today started at the very bottom as an unpaid intern and worked his way up. By the time 2013 came along, he was now president of the company. And when Graham chose to retire at 2015, he spent a 2-year period cultivating the relationship of our young speaker in those days and this new business. Those of you who started businesses know that a business will take several pivots before it finds its real market. Who knows what the monetization model will be when you start with an embryonic idea? Small recreational subs could have been scientific, could have been, nobody would have thought recreational at first. When Tom Perkins launched his on the wharf about a dozen years ago, I went to this launch and I looked at the thing, I could barely fit in it, and I wondered, Tom, what's the market for these? Perkins. Yeah, right. That's the right question, Ron. What's the total addressable market? What's the TAM for recreational submarines? Well, there couldn't be a better speaker to address that subject than our speaker today, the president CEO. Come and talk to us all about this. Please welcome Adam Wright. Thank you, Adam.
Well, thanks so much, Ron, for that introduction. I did want to mention my grandfather, George Kiskadin, who had sailed from this yacht club years ago. I never got the chance to meet him, but I hope that I'm sort of continuing the family tradition of sailing, but applying it underwater. So my name is Adam Wright. I am the CEO of DeepFlight. And DeepFlight develops kind of a new form of submarine, and it's specifically designed for underwater recreation and tourism. So we basically rethought the entire concept of what is a submarine. Submarines, you conjure up an image of a submarine in your mind. It's either a scientific device or a military device. We've taken that concept, we've basically ripped it up, and we've started over from scratch from a specifically recreational and tourism standpoint. So our mission is to provide amazing underwater experiences that really allow people to connect with the ocean wilderness. We're not down there per se to do any form of work. We're not trying to pick up samples. We want to provide people with sort of an underwater experience that really allows them to see what is down there. So I think the best way to give sort of an initial introduction is really to show a short video of what that experience entails. So Tom, if you wouldn't mind cueing the video. So this was recently filmed in the Maldives. This is one of our submarines at the Four Seasons in the Maldives. I'll go a little bit more into the business model later, but if you're interested in going on a submarine ride, you can take one right now in the Maldives. As you can see, it's not a traditionally designed submarine. It looks a little bit more like an airplane instead of a... And when we say fly underwater, we literally mean flying underwater. And I'll get into a little bit more details about that. So, don't we already have personal submarines? Why, isn't that already a thing? Why do we need to redesign the personal submarine? So just give you a little bit of background on sort of what is the current state of the art. When you say personal submarine, what is there available in the world today? So this is one of our competitors, a company called U-Boat Works. They're from the Netherlands, and the offerings today that most companies produce are sort of large, heavy. They have limited range, and they're based on scientific subs. So they basically took the concept of a scientific sub, and they've said, okay, well, if you want to own a personal submarine, go ahead. It has a lot of, it has sort of hydraulic arms. It's able to go very, very deep. I think this one probably goes around 1,000 meters. And it's really built for these deep water scientific missions, which is great. If that's what you're into, that's perfectly good. Another one of our major competitors called Triton, they also build a fantastic product, but it's also very heavy. So as you can see, you need sort of a very, I guess, complex and expensive infrastructure in order to launch, recover, and operate the submarine. So it's very expensive. Not only is the submarine expensive itself, but actually operating the submarine is even worse. So if you talk about tourism submarines, this is Atlantis. My wife and I did a trip on an Atlantis submarine in Maui. It was a great experience. It's kind of think of it as an underwater tour bus, a little bit kind of like a little bit like Disneyland, but it has, for lack of a better term, it has sort of a lack of design creativity. You're sort of in a large capsule. You're going underwater. It goes about maybe 1 knot, and you see some fish, you see some shipwrecks, but it's really sort of a less than breathtaking experience. The ocean a lot of times is a fairly poorly stocked aquarium, and you're with this particular sub, you are kind of crammed in there with 64 other people. You're sort of sitting back to back. And having confined spaces for a long time, let's just say that the air could be a little bit fresher at the end of the trip. So we looked at all of those different factors in terms of, okay, what is the current state of the art in personal submarines, and how do we make that better? So what makes DeepFlight different? Why are we more of a personal submarine and a recreational submarine than anybody else? So firstly, we design our submarines with using composites. So the pressure hull in any submarine is the structure that keeps the human occupants safe. The traditional pressure hulls are created from metallic substances, steel or aluminum, or acrylics, so spherical plastic. Sometimes glass is even used. But because of those traditional materials, there are limitations with the sort of the shape of those pressure hulls. So by using composites, we're able to kind of morph the pressure hull shape to fit the human body. And a human is well, I guess depending on the human, but generally humans are very kind of non-spherical shapes. So generally speaking, so trying to cram a human into a spherical pressure hull is sort of a waste of volume. And by all that wasted volume, you now have to kind of counteract that wasted volume in order to get the submarine to do what it's supposed to do, which is go underwater. By using composites, we're really able to minimize the volume inside the pressure hull, but put it where the human needs it the most. So there's space kind of around the shoulders. You're able to move your torso around. So think of it kind of like a three-dimensional kayak in a way. So the key factor number 2, I guess the differentiating factor for DeepFlight, is the fact that we are always positively buoyant. So what does that mean? So a normal submarine, just like a scuba diver, has what's called a ballast system, and this is sort of like your BCD if you're a scuba diver. And a normal submarine will sort of change its density in order to surface or to sink. Much like a hot air balloon is sort of lighter than air, a normal submarine is sort of heavier than water. For our submarines, we've essentially done away with any form of ballast system whatsoever. So the submarine is always positively buoyant. If you leave it alone, it will just float on the surface. So in order to get underwater, what you need to do is provide forward momentum. So as just like an airplane flies underwater, a deep flight submarine will an airplane flies above water. A normal or a deep flight submarine flies underwater. So you're relying on the flow of the water going over the wings to provide the downward lift to push the sub underwater. Imagine sort of a penguin, swimming around, flying underwater. If a penguin were to stop, he would just float right back up. So that's sort of the basic principle of how we operate. It's also sort of an intrinsic safety factor because there's no mechanism to fail and cause your submarine to become stranded on the bottom. So these are there are other developments that we can go into, but those are really the key developments that makes a deep flight submarine apart from any other submarine. So what do those developments gain us from the perspective of building a personal or recreational submarine? So positive buoyancy is essentially intrinsic safety. If you do nothing, if you turn off your sub, if you run out of batteries, if anything happens, your submarine is just going to float back up to the surface automatically. There's no pressure difference, so you're always at 1 atmosphere of pressure, so you can come up or go down as fast as you want. So by having no system on board that can fail and cause your submarine to get heavy and get stuck on the bottom, that's one aspect that makes the submarine kind of intrinsically safe. So they're also lightweight because of the use of composites and the minimum volume of the pressure hull. It also makes them very, very lightweight and easy to operate. So this is just one example of a way of launching your submarine is that you can literally back it down a boat ramp. So this kind of this lack of kind of heavy infrastructure makes it so that you can operate these submarines at a much wider variety of locations. So it also provides because of the sort of the underwater flight characteristics, it also sort of creates a dynamic experience for the guests. So compare this sort of maneuvering that you see on the screen here, compare that with the 64-passenger school bus, and you can see how you would have a much more dynamic and interesting experience flying around underwater in a deep flight rather than a sort of a hot air balloon style. So even if you're not seeing fish, you're still able to explore the underwater wilderness at a relatively high speed and do pretty cool maneuvering while you're doing it. So think of it as sort of a small airplane kind of Cessna tour of the Grand Canyon. So we also have significant design freedom. So by getting away from traditional materials and moving more into composites, we're able to come up with much more interesting and exciting and potentially even artistic shapes for the submarines, but also still maintain kind of low frontal area and make the whole submarine sort of transverse through the water in a very kind of efficient manner. So talk a little bit about kind of what markets we serve. We serve kind of two main markets right now. One is the private ownership market. This market was essentially started by Tom Perkins when he purchased a custom-made personal submarine from us. But we've gone into that market a little bit deeper, and we've created a product called the DeepFlight Dragon. The DeepFlight Dragon is a little bit different from our traditional flying submarines in the sense that it's actually built like an underwater quadcopter. So this, in order to sink underwater, you have to activate the 4 vertical thrusters that actually push the sub underwater. So it's very similar to how a quadcopter or a helicopter even operates in air, but this is the inverse underwater. Same principles apply. If you run out of power or you have a problem underwater, you just switch everything off and it comes right back up. So this was designed from a very kind of small footprint and a very light weight. So you can operate it from a larger variety of yachts. We have a presence at a variety of different yacht shows, including the Monaco Yacht Show, Fort Lauderdale Yacht Show, etc. But the market that we're most excited about, and that's sort of a recent pivot for the company, is the sort of the resort market. And so we've spent the last couple of years developing a 3-seat design called the DeepFlight Super Falcon 3S. And the purpose of this design is to have a pilot, so a pilot in the front cockpit, and 2 passengers in the back. So this way, you're able to utilize the submarine as a let's call it a tour vehicle. So you can bring couples. A son and his father, a mother-daughter type of thing, and you can bring people on these amazing experiences underwater. Obviously, you have a 360-degree view. You have an acrylic bubble above your head. Your head is also situated kind of right in the center of the bubble. So that makes it so that there's hardly any diffraction between the clear plastic and the water outside. So it's that you're essentially getting the feeling of just being immersed in water, but you're comfortable and dry and always at 1 atmosphere in an air-conditioned, with a comfortable seat, and you even have a cup holder and a music dock. Safety is, of course, when we're operating these submarine tours, safety is obviously kind of the number 1 priority. And I'm very proud to say that we've been able to, we're working with a third-party maritime classification agency by the name of Lloyd's Register. You may be familiar with them. There's sort of U.S. has ABS, American Bureau of Shipping. Lloyd's Register is a more European-based, but they have a presence kind of worldwide. And we've worked with them over the past 2 years to provide third-party kind of safety certification services for the submarine. So that's a really important step for us to be able to partner with, let's say, resorts and offer tours, is that there needs to be this third party involved to say that, yes, your device is safe, it's been tested, it's been surveyed, et cetera. And that was a really big step in the development of submarines, to have a composite-based submarine get a third-party certification. So that was sort of a first in the world of personal submarines. Also, something to note is that we are 100% environmentally friendly. So we're battery powered. We're never putting any. There's sort of a minimum amount of acoustic and electrical emissions that are put into the water. And we also never land on the reef. So a normal submarine with a sort of a ballast chamber, one of the things that they like to do at times is just kind of land straight on the seafloor and just kind of hang out and sit there and sort of look around. We believe that is a sort of a type of pollution that we shouldn't do. So we're basically a visitor in this underwater wilderness, and we kind of we take nothing and leave nothing behind. So DeepFlight Adventures is a sort of let's call it the tourism arm of DeepFlight. So DeepFlight has 2 major business models. One is the private sales model to yacht owners, and the other is DeepFlight Adventures. And what we do with DeepFlight Adventures is we partner with seaside resorts, and we provide a turnkey package with training, with obviously the submarine, and with all the associated gear that goes into running the submarine. We train the local crew to then operate the submarine and provide tours for the guests of that resort. So it's really an exciting way, both for the resort to kind of differentiate their property and offer these amazing submarine tours, but also gives the guest kind of another really exciting activity that's different from the standard resort activities, such as paragliding and zip lining and all this kind of stuff. It really enables you to, if you're visiting a seaside resort and you're not going underwater, it's a little bit of a waste of your experience, in my humble opinion. So currently we have 2 locations. We have actually a 2-seat version that's operating at Lathala Island in Fiji. This is a very exclusive private resort owned by the co-founder of Red Bull, and they offer the submarine tour as sort of an inclusive package to their guests. And as of today, they've had over 1,000 dives completed. And the first 3-seat Super Falcon, and the photos and the video that you saw earlier, that was the first sort of true DeepFlight Adventures partnership that we have operating now, which is at the Four Seasons Resort Maldives. There's actually several Four Seasons resorts in the Maldives, and this one is at Landa Garavaru. So if you're interested in going on a tour, feel free to get in touch with me, and we can figure out a way to get you there. The model is essentially a concessionaire model. So we partner with a local operator that is already operating their sort of scuba diving and their water sports, and we provide that training, we provide the maintenance, and we provide the hardware for them to operate it. So let's go a little bit into sort of launching and recovering. So there's 3 basic ways of launching and recovering a resort-based submarine. So the simplest is just called a beach crawler. You have the submarine is on sort of a wheeled platform, and it just crawls right into the beach, right into the water, and launches the submarine. It's kind of the simplest way. It's really good for resorts that have sort of a limited amount of infrastructure, no docks potentially, and you can, the sub sort of lives in a hangar that's on the beach, and that's where all the maintenance and the charging and the associated activities would take place. The secondary tier is a fixed location launching and recovering dock. So this is what we have operating in the Maldives. It's basically a floating dock that's moored in a fixed location, and it has a hydraulic platform. So the submarine comes up, hydraulic platform lifts it out of the water, and that's where you do all of the basic maintenance and the changing of passengers. This is it's a fairly inexpensive and easy way to get up and running. But the ultimate way is what's called a mobile launch and recovery system, which is essentially, think of it as a sort of a pontoon boat with a hydraulic platform, and this allows it kind of maximizes the flexibility of locations with which you can operate your sub. So you can, if you have bad weather on one side of the island, you just motor over to the other side, and you're able to set up your dive sites kind of with the most favorable conditions for diving in a particular day. So the next step for DeepFlight is we are continuing to partner with more and more resorts. We hope to have 10 or more subs launched over the next 3 years. But like most startups, obviously, funding can be a challenge. We were lucky enough to get associated with a Chinese company, a big sort of Chinese conglomerate doing a lot of research and development underwater. Unfortunately, the current state of U.S.-China relations. I also speak fluent Mandarin, so that was helpful in that. But the current state of U.S.-China relations makes that not a sort of a non-starter for investment purposes. So currently, we we have a number of kind of feelers out, and we do have some investment opportunities available if anybody is interested in getting into submarines. So that basically, I know I want to make sure I spend a significant amount of time kind of answering specific questions. So that I think gives you a pretty good idea of sort of what is a deep flight sub and what kind of business model we're pursuing. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to some of your questions.
Wonderful. Our guest today at the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon is Adam Wright, CEO of DeepFlight Submarines. So, Adam, how deep do DeepFlight subs go?
It's a good question. So we have built submarines to go very deep, in fact. So we had a project to go to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. It was a sort of an experimental sub, but
How deep is that?
that's 37,000 feet.
37,000 feet, so
Yep.
that'd be around 6 miles?
7 miles.
7 miles.
Yep. So, but for purposes of the company now and the business models that we're really pursuing is really in the sort of the shallow water, 100 meters and above. So, our tourism subs generally max out at 100 meters, and that's sort of in line with when a lot of the natural light starts to disappear. And that layer of ocean is really the place that you're able to get the most kind of exciting experiences. So see the most wildlife, have the most color, the most coral. So that's where we're focusing on right now.
So joining us today for this talk is in fact the co-founder and VP of marketing for DeepFlight. So let's also welcome Karen Hawks. Karen Hawks, smile, hand up, great. So Graham Hawks, the founder of the company, he was a visionary, kind of a little bit like your uncle or your grandfather, George Cascadden. Talk a little bit about what it was like to work with this visionary, what
Absolutely.
attracted you originally, and what it was like to have him as a colleague.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you know, my history with Graham is long and illustrious. I mean, I started working for him as just a recent high school graduate, and so he really, I guess, made me the engineer that I am today. So he introduced me to all concepts of submarines. He was a very passionate man. He had kind of very different and exciting ideas about how a submarine should be designed, and that's part of obviously it's in thanks to his vision that allowed the company to have such a unique product. So to kind of think outside the box. So you really can kind of compare his vision to someone like Elon Musk, for example.
And or your grandfather.
And my grandfather, exactly. Unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to meet him, but I hope that I am, carrying on his legacy by staying in the ocean.
So George Cascadden had a boat called New World, which was kind of a breakthrough boat. And he was actually quite a visionary. When he asked us to produce the Art Deco exhibition for the Oceanic Society, he was very aware of what was happening in the ocean. This was back in '74. In the end of '73, he asked us, and he was worried about what was happening in the ocean 40 years before anybody was talking about it whatsoever. He was talking about the coral, and he was talking about pollution inside the environment. And so that gets me to the next question. You said that there's zero pollution effects by your subs. How long does it take to charge them? How long do they operate under the water? And no polluting effects?
Yeah. Well, firstly, let me comment a little bit on the sort of the ocean, sort of green angle. So we're not. Our mission is not to do science, quote unquote, right? But we are what we're trying to do is get people to have these experiences underwater and really connect with the ocean and be able to make the decision for themselves on how they want to participate in a conservation effort, right? So we're able to partner with a variety of different organizations, from coral to ocean trash, things like this. From an engineering perspective, we are fully electric, so we're not putting out any form of emissions into the water. We also have no ballast system, so because we have no ballast system, we don't need an emergency weight drop. And so a lot of submarines out there have emergency weight drops, which they're actually putting lead into
Right.
the environment
Right.
as a method of coming back up. So we literally leave nothing, and we make no impact on the environment.
How many batteries? Talk about battery capacity.
Sure. Well, we use lithium-ion batteries.
How big?
It's a 16 kilowatt system. So it's a specific type of battery that's designed for underwater use. But it is based on the battery technology that's used in a lot of the electric vehicles, electric cars, et cetera.
Now, I'm going to keep asking questions until I see a question from the audience, and I encourage questions from the audience. We'll bring a mic to you when we see a question from the audience. And we have a question from the ether, and okay, yes, Julia.
Yeah. There are a couple. Alex Kent wonders what the typical guest charge per passenger might be, what the purchase cost for the 3-passenger, which was not covered. And there's another question from another person.
Sure. Well, so the tour cost in the Maldives, and again, the tour cost can depend on the location, the duration of the flight, and kind of the associated experience that you're going to be having. But generally, it's about $750 per person.
Per day or per How many hours?
It would be about an hour-long dive.
Okay.
And then for a purchase price, so if you were to purchase a submarine outright for either your yacht or your resort, the price can range anywhere from 1.7 to 2.5 million, depending on how you want it configured.
What if you want it for your home?
Well, we're doing a 2-for-1 deal, actually.
So you've made how many completed subs at this point?
We've built over 10 submarines at this point.
And what's the start to finish time of the most recent one?
So the most recent one was the new 3-seat Super Falcon. That engineering effort was actually about 1.5 years, and it was so long primarily because we had to go through the certification process with Lloyd's Register. Now that we've sorted that out, we estimate anywhere between 8 to 10 months for one unit.
Another question from the web. Yes, Julia.
Yes. And how long can it stay down?
Good question. In general, you're limited by human comfort, really. So you do have 72 hours of life support, emergency life support on the submarine. So
How many hours?
72 hours. But in general, I think that the longest, think about how long you'd want to sit in a kayak. So the longest time would probably be 2 to 3 hours. And that's just based on human comfort, but you can stay longer.
We have a question from world famous Mallory Cup winner and artist Jimmy DeWitt. Jimmy.
Graham Hawkes was in Point Richmond, and I'm from Point Richmond, and Graham Hawkes knew I was an artist, and he wanted to take me down. We never got to it. He wanted me to go down and experience the flying, and I got the feeling like it was the Blue Angels, what they could do, only at much slower. Anyhow, he never did get out. He wanted me to do a painting of the first submarine doing its things. So anyhow.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we've actually met before. I remember you quite well, and we have one of your paintings kind of hanging up in our office. But in terms of the maneuvering capability of the sub, it is a bit like a Blue Angel, but going at much slower speed. So you are able to do kind of loops, barrel rolls, and really steep climbs and things like this. So those are definitely possible maneuvering.
What's the speed?
They max out at about 5 knots. So it's not 5 knots doesn't seem like all that fast, but when you're in a submarine and you're cruising around a reef, it is actually quite fast. You can go as slow as a half knot before you hit your stall speed, and that's when you start floating up.
What's the PSI inside the cabin?
You're always at 1 atmosphere, so you have there's zero pressure change on your ears or anything, so you can go down as fast as you want and stay as long as you want, and there's no pressure differential.
And you dive by basically propelling yourself downward with the wings?
That's correct. So you dive the same way that an airplane flies. So you have to maintain forward momentum. The water flow over the wing is what provides your downward lift, essentially.
So give us just some picture. What's the turning radius of one of these? If you want a cup of donut, how much space do you need?
You'd probably need, if you wanted to do a full 360, you'd probably need about 2 sub lengths in order to do that.
And they're how long?
It's about 25 feet.
And what's the wingspan?
It's I think 12 feet, but they fold up, so they're easy to transport.
And what's the height when the fins are up and all?
About 6 feet, 5 feet, something like that.
And we have another question from the audience. Yes, sir.
As you're certainly aware, we in the U.S. Navy have been using miniature submarines since the 50s. The obvious question is, why have you avoided the U.S. Navy and the military marketing application?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say that we've avoided the market, but as Ron alluded to, you never know where a business is going to pivot into. So the recreational market is sort of the one that became apparent to us. We have done some military contracts, kind of smaller, kind of one-time military contracts. But in terms of building a vehicle that's sort of applicable to a military type of use, I think that a lot of the research and development nowadays is going into kind of unmanned robotics, autonomous submarines, and our specialty is really in these sort of lightweight manned submarines. That being said, if there were a military application and somebody were to bring us a request for quote, we would certainly look at it.
Or a check? You respond?
Check would be good. Check. And go Bears, by the way. I am a Cal grad myself.
Navy's got a lot more money than the resorts.
I realize.
As an entrepreneur, we could tell that he picked up on that. Julia, your question.
Yeah, there's several actually. One is about maintenance and how much for each dive and how much time between and how much does it cost?
So maintenance time between dives. Good
Okay.
question.
So with a trained crew, you can turn over a dive in like 15 minutes. So the main maintenance that you would need to do between dives is essentially to change out the carbon dioxide filtration. So we use a scrubber system similar to what you would have as a rebreather diver. So that you would generally do that between dives. After a day of diving, you would you would charge up the batteries. You would potentially swap out the oxygen bottles. You would give it a sort of a rinse down. So it's a fairly simple daily maintenance procedure. There are other things that you want to do kind of on a 6-month and a 1-year timeline, like look at your seals and your O-rings and things like this. But we estimate the total cost for a year of operating to be about $20,000.
Julia, another question from the
We
web.
have actually 3 more.
Great.
Yes. What kind of navigation equipment do you use?
So we have the option to add things like sonar and things like this, but since we're operating primarily in very clear water and very nice dive sort of dive sites, Most of the navigation is purely line of sight. We have a variety of different instruments on the sub that assist the surface crew with tracking and finding the sub in an emergency. So we have through water voice communication called UQC. We also have a tracking system that allows the surface boat to have sort of a map of where the sub is. And the sub also has kind of we call it an acoustic modem. So it's actually spitting out data acoustically, and the surface crew is able to see kind of exactly what is what are the levels of the batteries, what is the cabin pressure, all of these different things. So you're able to see in multiple different ways sort of the health and the location of the sub at all times.
What's the sea crew like who's monitoring you? If you go on a trip, who's watching me when I'm going around in the islands?
Right. So you generally operate with a surface support vessel. So generally, it can be kind of even a small dinghy that has a transponder in the water, and you're just basically following around where the sub is
Are
going.
they watching me on a screen?
Yeah, they'd be watching you on a screen. I mean, you would lose line. You would lose. The sub's going too deep. You can't see it from the top, but you'd be able to know where it is, and you're talking through the underwater telephone to the pilot.
The only one of these I ever got in was really tight. It was like a Formula One car.
Right.
How tight is this one compared to the one that Tom Perkins
Yeah, so
had?
Tom, that sub was built specifically for Tom, right? So we actually literally
Another person, right.
measured his body and sort of made sure that it kind of fit him like a glove. For the tourism version, the Super Falcon 3S, we've done a lot more development on the comfort of the passengers. So it should be able to fit someone up to 6'6" and like 260 pounds. So fairly spacious.
How heavy are these subs?
A two-seat version would be about 4,000 pounds, whereas a three-seat version can be upwards of 6,000 to 7,000 pounds. But
4,000 pounds, and they're all carbon?
it's actually not carbon.
Oh.
We use a sort of a more fiberglass matrix. But 4,000 pounds, if you compare that to a traditionally designed submarine, you're at least going to be twice as heavy with a traditional design. So you're saving about twice the weight.
What would a traditional sub be made out of?
Traditional sub would be either a metallic, so it would have a steel hull, for example, or an acrylic hull, so it would have basically a big spherical plastic hull. And the plastic itself is not all that heavy. It's just that because it's a sphere, it's got all that wasted volume that you then need to put weight on the sub to be able to sink it down. So that just makes the whole sub heavier.
Do you guys make these yourself, or do you have somebody else make the hull for you?
Yeah, we don't. Right now, we don't do any direct manufacturing. We outsource all the manufacturing, and we do the assembly and the testing and the QC and the design, obviously, in-house.
Julia from the web.
There are 4 more questions. So
man.
if somebody from the audience has one to
Don't
do
wave
that.
your mic around, Julia.
Sorry. God. How do you control the atmosphere of oxygen and CO2?
So the oxygen is basically bled in so the oxygen tanks are situated outside, and the pure oxygen is fed into the sub. When you breathe in and breathe out, you are metabolizing that oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide gets filtered or trapped in a solid substrate, which is it's basically it's called soda lime, and that is basically it is a chemical reaction that goes on, and after every dive or 2 dives, you would change out that filter. So there's so in terms of how much oxygen is getting bled in, there's a computer system that basically reads the pressure, or the partial pressure of oxygen, and it adjusts the amount that's getting bled in as a function of how much people are breathing. So if you're really excited or you're panicking or scared or whatever, you're going to be consuming more oxygen. The computer is going to read that and bleed in more oxygen to compensate.
What's the circulation air inside? How often do you circulate the air and the volume?
The air is getting constantly circulated. So there's fans that are blowing the air around, and we do a number of different modeling, sort of real modeling and computer modeling to make sure that there's a sort of a constant mix of gas that's going on, because you wouldn't want to have like sort of a, basically a thermocline of different gas concentrations.
And the canopies open up to let people get inside?
Yes, the canopy is open up.
Russell Long wants to know, how long until the cost drops below $1 million?
As soon as you buy about 4 of these, Russell,
Tesla's
your father would like them.
Tesla's became less expensive. Will these too?
Well, the problem is there's never going to be enough people that are going to want to have their own personal submarine. I mean, we are land mammals, right? So I don't think the cost of a personal submarine is not going to drop much lower than what it is right now. What may drop is the cost to actually go in a submarine. So as we get more and more submarines out there, think of it like I guess a helicopter, right? A helicopter, if you wanted to buy a helicopter, there's never going to be a $50,000 helicopter, right? No matter how many people want to go in a helicopter, you're still not going to want to buy your own helicopter, right? But you could spend, $100, $200 to go on a helicopter ride. So this is a very similar type of comparison that we make. So as we get more subs in the water, and the price will drop as a per passenger basis.
So Russell Long's dad had a beautiful boat called Undine, which had lots of freeboard, we'll all remember. And you almost could have fit one of these in there, but the question would be, how big of a yacht do you need to put one of these on it?
That's a good question. Well, we actually have a contract right now for a 40-meter yacht. So what is that, 120, 130 foot?
130 feet, okay.
And that's going to be kind of on the smaller side for a personal submarine. I would say that as we continue to develop new technologies and new products, we may come out with even smaller design, maybe even a 1-passenger that can go on a sort of a smaller yacht from there.
So big power boats that are 150 feet and be above that are in good shape for putting one of these subs in.
Yeah, I mean sailboats too. I mean Tom's Maltese Falcon was a sailing yacht.
And especially with all the stern transom entrances and so on.
Correct.
Right. We have another question inside. From a naval architect, no less. Paul Kamen. Yes, sir, your question.
Two questions relating to visibility. It seems that the viability of submarine tourism depends on very clear water, and often that would be a limiting factor in how often you can make the trips and how desirable the trips are. And you also can't come to a stop or else you float up, and the navigation is by visual reference. So every time I draw a doodle of a submarine like this, I end up with a kind of bombardier bow, where the nose is a far forward visibility port, and most of the visual line of sight is through air inside the sub, and minimizes the visibility through the water and maximizes the visibility through the air. I'm wondering if you have gone that route with your preliminary design efforts, and why it was rejected, and you went back to the individual cockpits with the domes.
Well, it's kind of a multifaceted question. I think that I guess to first address the water clarity. I mean, you're right. There are going to be days, no matter where we're located, that you're going to have to call off the day of diving because of poor visibility. We, as part of our selection criteria for selecting partners for the tours, one of our criteria is that we need to find it needs to be fairly clear water, right? So the Maldives, for example, some of the other places that we're looking at are, French Polynesia, Bahamas, places like this. So yes, there are going to be times where you're going to not go diving. However, the tours are also at kind of planned routes, right? So people that will have essentially milestones that you're doing the same route every time. So even with slightly reduced visibility, you're still able to safely navigate that route. From the perspective of kind of viewports and putting viewports in different spaces, one of our initial designs was DeepFlight 1, a very early experimental sub, and that had a window at the very front of the sub, and you were actually piloting the sub by sort of lying on your stomach and leaning forward, and that put essentially the window or the viewport right next to your eyes and like right where you're traveling, right? What we found was that was just sort of an uncomfortable position to maintain for a long period of time, and the sort of a more traditionally designed cockpit that has sort of looks and feels like an airplane while it may not be the most efficient way from a visibility perspective, it compensates for that from the coolness factor of getting into this cockpit.
And I imagine the passengers are looking, the show is to the sides instead of directly
That's right.
ahead
The
anyway.
show is actually to the side, and generally how they operate these things is that you're never really going straight forward. You're always kind of going at a slight angle, so your eyes are essentially looking down because you've banked the sub a little bit to the side.
Right.
Obviously, you touched on it as well. You can't, in the Super Falcon design, you can't stop, right? However, we've addressed that concern with the Dragon design, the Dragon quadcopter design. You can stop and hover in one place, but that's right now that's more aligned to the private ownership market rather than the tour market.
And the second question, which I think will have a much simpler answer, other than keeping the inside air cold and dry, how do you avoid fogging?
Well, we have a specific. So in our air conditioning system, we have we have a big kind of I guess cooling panel that has a lot of fins on it, and the idea of that is that moisture is always going to condense on the metallic surfaces first. So we basically have a condenser in the cockpit for the moisture to condense on, so that it does not fog up the dome. We also do put an anti-fog sort of spray on it as well.
So lightning round. How many rides per service day could you put these through?
Maximum you could do anywhere. You could do up to 5, even 6 dives a day if you really had if you had the demand and you had a really well-trained crew.
So you've done 1,000 dives in one of the
in Fiji, but that's a much lower. It's a smaller resort, so you're not. They only have, I think, maximum of say 20 guests on
Over
the
what
island.
period of time?
That was launched in late 2014. So in about 4 years, they've got 1,000 dives.
So at $750 a ride, that would be 2,000 dives for straight payback, just CapEx payback. What's the capital X payback in a case like that?
That's kind of a complicated question, because there's also, you also have to account for the labor costs and everything like this. But we generally, our CapEx payback is essentially in a little bit more than a year of operating your sub. You've paid back your CapEx.
So do these have lifting rings on them?
They do. So you're lifting. There's multiple ways of lifting them. You can lift them from the side with kind of big lifting pins, or there's a kind of big eyes on the top that you can put a shackle.
And can I take videos when I'm riding around inside of it?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people hold up their cell phone and take videos when they're inside. We also there's an integrated video system on board as well, so you're taking video constantly.
Do big fish ever bite you?
Hasn't happened yet. We're looking forward to that day.
Because if it bleeds, it leads,
That's right. That's right.
We have one more question. Yes, sir.
So, being accustomed to thinking about airplanes, I love the idea of a vehicle where when it hits its stall speed, it goes up. It's much more appealing. Up to safety.
By comparison to
It's a
airplanes.
really good idea. But thinking about that, if I understand correctly, you get the bends by coming up without too fast, based on one's own buoyancy. How do you avoid that? You just don't go very deep.
Well, so you're always so the pressure hull that you're sitting in has, 2.5-inch thick walls. And so the water is trying to crush you and put you at its own pressure, but the pressure hull is resisting that. So you're always the human is always kept at 1 atmosphere, no matter how deep you are, no matter how fast you're going up and down. So you're literally like whatever the pressure is when you close that dome, that pressure is staying with you the entire time. So the bends, you get the bends because you're scuba diving and you're breathing air that has been compressed by the ocean pressure. Right, and so the bends is caused by the nitrogen that you're metabolizing, and it can't get out of your bloodstream fast enough. Right, for this, in a submarine, in any submarine, you're breathing air and nitrogen that's always at the same is always at ambient pressure, basically.
With that, thank you for joining the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon live from the St. Francis Yacht Club. Our speaker today has been Adam Wright, CEO of DeepFlight Submarines. You can order them right now at the bar. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah, we have a 2-for-1
And with
deal.
that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, thanks.